Tonight, I'm going to be giving you guys a talk about potion making and other forms of liquid magic, such as filters and ointments and tinctures. And before I get into that, I'm going to give you guys our number, and so you can feel free to give me a call at any time and ask questions or what have you. So the number is 914-323-6751. All right, so first I'm going to give you guys a little bit of the history and lore that surrounds witches and potion making, and other forms of healing by watery magic or liquid magic. So in the ancient Mediterranean, especially in Homeric times, we have a lot of legends of witches who used potions. One of the most famous of these witches is the witch Circe, who Odysseus and his men encountered on their big trip down to the island where she lived, and she was the one who was famous for turning them into swine, and like the men they are, just kidding. And she actually was related to other myths besides this famous story. And one of the myths included her giving a love potion to a man named Glaucus, who I think later became a god. And this love potion was aimed at the god, I don't know if she was a god, at Scylla. And Scylla was a hard person to make fall in love with you. So there's an example of a witch using a potion in Mediterranean lore. Another would be Medea, who was a badass witch. I mean, she killed a lot of people, which was maybe not so kosher, but she was really, her story was really intense and very interesting. So one of the most famous potions that she procured was the youth restoring potion. And to apply this to whoever's youth she wanted to restore, she would actually have to cut their throat. And she used this in a trick against King Pelias. So she would cut their throat and then insert the potion into the wound she had created. And then from this, they would recover and, have long-lasting youth. And she actually tricked the daughter of King Pelias into cutting his throat. But then Medea, the witch, ran away before giving them the potion. So that was nasty. And there's a really famous centaur that, if any of you have studied Greek myths or legends, you'll have probably heard of. His name is Chiron, and he taught this other cool guy named Asclepius. And he taught him the art of healing, and this included the arts of sorcery and potion making. And not only did Asclepius himself know how to make potions, but there's a story in which the goddess Athena actually gives him a magical potion. And this potion is made from the blood of the Gorgon. A Gorgon is a monster in ancient Greek myth. Medusa was one of the Gorgons. And so legend tells that the blood of the Gorgon has a different effect depending from which side the blood was taken. If it was taken from the right side of the Gorgon, it has a miraculous effect and is said to be able to bring the dead back to life. But taken from the left side, it becomes a deadly poison. And outside of old legends, we have some evidence of, well, we have a lot of evidence of potion making and, love philters in witchcraft and in the witch trials of the early modern and earlier medieval periods. And one of the witches who was tried of witchcraft was a woman named Marjorie Goodman, and she was known as the Witch of Eye. And she was burned at Smithfield because in former days she had been giving potions and philters to Miss Eleanor Cobham. And these potions were to ensure the specific affections of a certain Duke of Gloucester. And so, usually people, whether they be folk practicing witches or, malefic witches, purportedly at the time, one of the most famous potions for them to make was a love potion. And as usual, people were just fine with utilizing that handy tool unless things went south, in which case the witch was the first person they turned to point a finger and get somebody killed. And in folklore, we have, that's a little bit more modern than Circe and Medea, we have other examples of potions. So one of them comes from an old Irish folktale called the Fairy Doctress, and that's from the writings Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland by Lady Francesca Speranza Wilde, and that was written in 1887. And actually, it wasn't uncommon for people like Lady Wilde to go forth and record the tales and legends and stories of people not only in their own country but also in foreign countries. Even for women to do this in an academic field was not uncommon because the ideas of folklore and preserving these tales was romantic to the period and was respectable to the period, and it fit very well with the ideology of the time. So in this story, the Fairy Doctress, there's a wonderful example of a fairy doctor woman who got her power from the fairies. And this is just another form that's much more prominent in Ireland of people who are folk magicians or folk healers who get their power from the fairy folk in some way or other. So to give you a little bit of an idea, this is a little excerpt from that story. So there the fairies, kept them, or women, for 7 years, and at the end of time, when they grew old and ugly, they were sent back. For the fairies love nothing so much as youth and beauty. But as a compensation for the slight put on them, the women were taught all the fairy secrets and the magical mystery that lies in herbs, and the strange power they have over diseases. So by this means the women became all-powerful, and their charms or spells or potions could kill all or serve as they chose. There was a woman of the islands greatly feared, yet respected by the people for her knowledge of herbs, which gave her power over all diseases. But she never revealed the nature of the herb, and always gathered the leaves herself at night, and hid them under the eaves of the house. And if the person who carried the herb home let it fall to the ground by the way, it lost its power. Or if they talked of it, or showed it to any one, all the virtue went out of it. It was to be used secretly and alone, and then the cure would be perfected without fail. So that's an example of the sort of language and the sort of ideas that survived in potion lore through the 18th and 19th centuries. And another group of people who used the idea of liquid magic or liquid medicine were alchemists, and they had a vast array of different methods of procuring both things that we would deem magical and things we would deem medicinal through liquids. The most famous of these would be the elixir of life, like the sorcerer's stone kind of thing. But they had others as well. In Macbeth, the the Shakespeare play, there's 3 of the most famous witches in theater. And in one scene, these witches are brewing up a super nasty potion. It's got all kinds of icky ingredients, from like baby parts to like newt parts, and this is kind of part of where we get that largely spread idea of witches' potions, including nasty little giblets. However, it's commonly said that the eye of newt and other nasty ingredients that Shakespeare wrote in this scene are actually folk names for specific herbs. And something else that kind of contributed to the lack of respect given to potions in the modern time was the vast amount of charlatans who, in the 19th century, went about selling, fake potions for this and that. And that sort of turned people against it once they realized nothing was working. So, in general, most potions are used as a form of medicine, as a form of curing. And they're used by people who can't afford the modern medicine of the time, or who have ailments for which there is no medicine, such as heartache or hatred.
I studied evil, I can't deny it. Was a hoodoo charm called He Loved Me or Die. Some fingernail, a piece of her dress, a pocket theory, devil yes. I will relate the piteous consequence of my mistakes. Fallen slave to passing desire, making it dreaded love me or die. Against a jungle primeval green, she had the looks of a beauty queen. No bangles or chain wearing broken shoe, 75-cent bottle perfume. I said good morning, I tipped my hat all the while I was cunning like a rat. Smiling gaily looked her in the eye, I felt in my pocket He loved me or die. My past history one to behold. I studied magic from days of old. Membership, secret society, power and wealth in my family. But Matilda, darling, why you don't take my wedding ring? Like a demon under the floor, bury the hoodoo down the back door. Broke through the town that a fever strike Matilda down. 9:30 the doctors arrive, priest come running 4:45. Standing in the weeds early next day, I saw the meat wagon rolling away. I seen Matilda laying in the back, her old mother wearing a suit of black. The trumpet and bang the drum, I wait for me judgment to come. I know her spirit is down beneath, I hear the weeping and gnashing of the teeth. Flames of hell licks at my feet, in the shadow of the jungle I feel the heat. Matilda's waiting in hell for me too, oh, 'cause she died from a bad hoodoo.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So that was a song by C.W. Stone King, and it's called "Love Me or Die." And it's one great example, although I don't know enough musical theory to say precisely what sort of music that song is. Whether it's, I know it's not exactly blues or jazz, but usually something that is common in the southern United States is for blues and jazz, especially blues songs, to incorporate elements of hoodoo and folk magic in their lyrics or in their subject matter. And so this is one great example of that, where the singer is singing about a charm called Love Me or Die, which is a very intense love charm. The nature of which kind of forces the victim, the victim, to either love the caster or to die, obviously. And so it's perhaps a salsa, I don't know, ballad that's lamenting the repercussions of that particular charm. And it's something that's pretty common in Southern music. I would also like to thank my friend Jeremy Lipson for helping me figure out some of the tech stuff that was going on here. There were some technical difficulties during this broadcast, so he helped fix those. But back to what I was saying about potions. Oftentimes, potions are more medicinal than magical. And my small disclaimer is that you should definitely take caution to pursue both modern and alternative medicine if you decide to pursue alternative medicine at all. Because, again, this is stuff that's used both for magical reasons and because people didn't have better options or didn't know better at certain times. So everything I'm producing for you here on air is for the sake of knowledge rather than practical application. So teas are one of the most common forms of folk medicine, although I don't know if they would technically count as what most people think of as a potion. And so potion comes from the Latin word potillo, which comes from the Greek word poton, and both essentially mean to drink. So you do drink teas, although the connotations of a potion aren't necessarily there. And the difference between like a tea and a proper infusion depends on the herbs and the roots that the concoctor is using. Generally, the way to turn a tea into a proper infusion would be to just cover it for like 5 to 10 minutes after you've added the herbs to water that's been boiled. So by covering the steam and capturing all of that rising water, you're capturing some of the resins and more easily fumigated chemicals that could otherwise be trapped inside what you are going to ingest. And some of these resins, etc., are the point of making the infusion in the first place. So many teas have been made by many folk doctors and folk magicians, and some of these people have become famous, and as famous as a folk doctor can get, as in they've had like at least one book written about them. One of these would be Granny Gore, who I only recently found out about thanks to the blog Magic Screeches. And there's a book written about her cures. And she was an Ozark folk healer, and she passed away in 1917. So this is an example, in her words, of a tea that she used to cure. And so she said that bull nettles cured the chills while boiled down. They once cured Uncle Jim, who, when he got some of them stuck in him and they would not come out, went down to the James River with a hoe and dug some of the nettles like he had in him. and she boiled them up and gave him the tea, and then the illness broke them out, and it broke them out in a hurry. And the next morning, he continued on his rafting down the river. And she said that we also used to use buckthorn tea. So that's an example of a tea. It's infused into water that's brought to a boil, and it usually is completely herbal. And then if you want to make it more potent, you'll cover it for 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what the ingredients are. So you'll have to know a little bit about or hopefully a lot of it about the herbs you're using. A tincture is similar to a tea, or an infusion of water, except that it is infused into alcohol, most commonly, or alternatively sometimes into glycerin, especially if it's being made for like children and you don't want to, feed them booze. So this is often a little bit of a stronger infusion than water can produce, but most importantly, this will last a lot longer than a water infusion of herbs because the alcohol preserves the qualities and disinfects things as well. So usually you want to use a pretty high level of alcohol. The higher the better in general. But it does depend, again, on the herbs you're using. Some of them can be infused in like 45% vodka, for example. Others need like 90% vodka, so it depends. But instead of heating these, they are usually left to sit for, usually like weeks, depending on the constituents, in a dark place. And, the tincture would be shaken every couple days in this dark place to kind of stir up the herbs and infuse them into the alcohol. And once the time was up, which would have to be researched, the herbs would be strained and the alcohol would be preserved. And there are other uses for those alcohol and soaked herbs, but I'm not going to go into them yet. So the alcohol is, strained away from the herbs and bottled up, and again kept in a dark place, a dark, cool place, and the dosage for whatever the ailment is usually kept in a dropper, and depending on whatever the ailment is and the tincture used to cure it, the dose will be administered. So you can see that medicinal use of herbs requires a fair amount of knowledge and research beforehand. And this used to be passed down from between family members, and in some ways it still is, but less so. The most common way to learn these now, unless people are doing some quick Googling, which is potentially hazardous, is in a college, if that's available to them. So another form of liquid sort of medicine, but that can also be liquid magic, would be oils, and through oils, ointments as well. So oils have many medicinal properties, and it's another way of taking the constituents of the herbs and roots, etc., and letting the body absorb them in a different way, and sometimes in a more effective way. And there's another really great folk healer who is of the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, and we have his book still. It's called Powwow, or The Long Lost Friend, and in it he writes about the use of clove oil and its properties for healing against the weakness of the limbs, the purification of blood, the invigoration of the head and heart, to remove giddiness, mother pains, colic, curing the cold when it settles in the bowels, to stop vomiting. So clearly, like, this one herb has many properties, but not all of these are things that we still consider to be effective applications of clove or clove oil. Okay, I'm just going to say that. Anyway, so a few drops of this oil would be poured upon a cotton and applied to the aching teeth to relieve pain. That's the main way that I use cloves, is to relieve toothaches or to flavor things because the flavor is super strong. But you see here that he has things that we wouldn't really use for medicine as much. Like we still kind of refer to folk medicine for them, such as the invigoration of the head and heart. There aren't. Well, I guess there's more prescriptions for that sort of thing now, but there didn't, used to be. So there are also magical oils besides medicinal ones, like this example from the Pennsylvania Dutch Powwow book. And so some of these magical oils are, again, oils that are made from herbs. Others are oils that are made with certain herbs, etc., for the purpose of channeling the power or the magic identified with a certain planet. So planetary oils. And also in the hoodoo conjure traditions, there's the use of saint oils is really common in applying an oil that is dedicated to a specific saint. You sort of call on them to bless or whatever it is that saint does, whatever you are applying the oil to. I hope that made sense. I'm sorry I phrased that kind of strangely. Okay, so you have herbal oils, planetary oils, saint oils, and there are more, and oils are usually used in spells. They're used for dressing tools and anointing people, etc. And one form of creating an oil is similar to a tincture in that you can fill up, like a jar with the herbs that or things that you want to infuse, and then you pour in the oil to the top. And you do this with the alcohol too. I didn't mention this, filling it up with the herbs, and then you pour in the alcohol to the top. So there's just a little bit of air room left between the lid and the top of the jar. And then you close it up and you put it away in a dark place. And you can shake this every few days, depending. And so oils and tinctures can both be made in this way. However, there's a much faster way of creating an oil, because again, like a tincture, you would have to let this sitting oil sit for weeks and weeks, usually. But if you were to cook the oil in a double boiler by heating it lightly and then adding the herbs into it, then you will have your oil within a matter of hours. So you put the pot on the stove, bring the water to a boil, put a double boiler on top of it, and put in 1 part oil, 1 part herb. And it's helpful to bruise the herbs before putting them in oil or alcohol. And the base oil that you use is like sunflower oil or almond oil, or I think they sell just like plain, like mysteriously extracted oils also. And the breaking up of the herbs or berries or roots beforehand allows their properties to kind of infuse into the base substance more effectively. And so then you would have an oil rather quickly. And there's actually a way of turning this oil into a balm or an ointment, sort of like lip balm or chapstick, I guess. And so to do this, you would add, after it's been made into an oil and it's cooled down just a little bit, you pour the oil into a heat-resistant container, and this should be the final container. Oh wait, no. I'm sorry. Backtrack. While it's still on the double boiler, add 1 part all natural beeswax to the oil, and let the beeswax melt into it. And then pour it into the heat-resistant container, and when it cools, the wax will harden again, and you will have a waxy ointment, just like lip balm, same texture. This takes a little bit of time to get just right, but You also, besides beeswax, you can use animal lard, but I think a lot less people are comfortable with digging their hands in a whole bunch of animal fat than they are with touching pretty beeswax. An example of this would be an ointment for like skin, like a skin product. You could use like witch hazel, mullein, golden seal, herbs like that, and make them, add the beeswax after the oil is infused with these herbs, and then you would just rub it on the skin wherever it needed to be healed or softened, etc. And there's a magical application to ointments as well. They can be used similarly to oils in terms of anointing things or especially people. However, the most famous one related to witchcraft, which I think I covered about 2 episodes ago, is the flying ointment. And that was used by witches in lore to anoint themselves, and through the herbs in those they would have mild hallucinations, which would transport them to the witches' sabbat, where they would convene with the devil and other witches, etc., and have their meeting and curse everybody, basically. And so these still have a practical application as well, without being quite as poisonous and without cursing everybody. But for more information on that, just go to Sarah Lawless's blog. She's sort of the contemporary go-to witch on the subject, at least online, that's easily accessible. And her blog, she was formerly known as the Witch of Forest Grove, but I think her new blog is the Black Arts Foundry, if you want to Google that. And her name is Sarah Lawless. Again, not Sarah Lawrence, like this radio show broadcast. Okay. So another form that's more used for magic are perfumes and colognes. And not just like, Chanel for the purpose of seducing people, but, magically infused herbal colognes and perfumes, especially. These are extremely popular in hoodoo traditions. Usually they are alcohol-based perfumes, and they may be worn on a person, added to baths, sprayed on people during ritual, or made as offerings to spirits, or as magical food for mojo hands. Mojo hands are like a mojo bag or a gree-gree bag. They're little bags, usually made of silk or no, not silk. Oof. Well, okay, they're little cloth bags. I'm sorry, brain fart. That are specifically designed to be worn as amulets close to the body, usually even touching the skin, and each of them has a different property. And these would be procured by a hoodoo practitioner. Anyway, back to perfumes and colognes. They can also be sprinkled around the ground or the floor of a space, depending on what you wanted to do to that space. And some of the more popular colognes include Florida Water Cologne, which is used mostly for purification. I've also seen a lot of people use it by rubbing it on the hands and feet of people who are coming out of a trance state or a hypnosis state or a possession. And this sort of grounds them and cleans them. And Hoyt's cologne is used for luck and gambling. Orange blossom cologne is used for luck and love and money, etc. Similar to this application is the use of waters, and it's similar how it's like you don't drink them, but they are applied to wherever your intent is aimed. And these are really, again, popular in hoodoo. They have a peace water and a war water. And these usually are bought commercially and then used in conjunction with other ingredients and tools. So the peace water is usually used in the home, and it's sprinkled around the floor, placed on the table, etc. And it's a blue liquid, and it causes harmony, and it sort of smooths out arguments or tensions that may be hovering about in the air. And war water does the exact opposite, and it can be used to cause tension or to curse, or added to a curse, etc. And again, these are usually items that are bought in like a botanica, for example. And another application outside of the hoodoo practice of waters that specifically have magical properties would be in the traditions that J.B. Andrews documented in Neapolitan witchcraft. And this is his excerpt about waters used by witches. Witches are much sought after in affairs of the affections between lovers and between husbands and wives, and to restore love between parents and children. They use an acqua della concordia and an acqua della discordia, and a water of concord and a water of discord. To bring back an unfaithful lover, the witch goes at night to the cemetery, digs up with her nails the body of an assassin with her left hand, cuts off the 3 joints of the ring finger, then reduces them to powder in a bronze mortar. She mixes it with acqua benedetta senza morti, bought at the chemist's, and the lover is to sprinkle the road between his house and his sweetheart's with this water, and this will oblige the beloved one to return. And a very popular form of water magic comes with the use of holy water in Christian or Christian-based traditions. And this is usually used for a benediction or a blessing of some kind, or also in like exorcisms, for example. And so spagyrics are part of the alchemical use of liquid magic and medicine. And this comes from the word spagyric comes from the Greek words it basically means to collect or to extract. And so these would be used by alchemists with the process of fermentation, distillation, and then the extraction of herbs and their properties. And so the belief with spagyrics is that the ash of specific plants carries more of their potency than the plant before it's been incinerated. And so the alcohol extractions that I defined as tinctures can only do so much, but by burning a plant and adding it to a concoction of other materials, some of them herbal, some of them metallic, etc., you are creating a stronger substance. And this process of fermentation, distillation, and extraction, and the specifics of spagyrics that I'm not going to get into because it takes a lot of background, because everything in alchemy is related to something else. But essentially, it's related to the core idea of sulfur, mercury, and salts, or spirit as they're like the ethereal essence of deity is sulfur. I'm putting this badly, but the ethereal is sulfur, the mundane or material as salt, and mercury conjoining them. And also the idea of the phrase salve et coagula, which means to separate and then to combine. And this is a process that returns all throughout theology and magic combined. So potions themselves, there are many things that I've listed already that can be considered potions. Particularly among these that we think of as potions are the ones that can be ingested. However, we have this concept often that potions are comprised of animal little giblets and parts, and involve lengthy incantations and big cauldrons. And there is some truth to that. There's some different in the subtle terminology used. So often a potion, hard and true, is concocted with a base of wine or water or something else that people drink a lot, or it's added to something that people drink a lot. Because, like I said, the roots of this word come from the Greco-Roman words to drink. And it can include personal effects of the people involved. So if the potion is aimed at the concoctor, then it would have their personal giblets, perhaps, like hair or fingernails, etc. Or if they were casting or using a potion on someone else, it would have their personal little bits. Um, and it's often, like I said, related to animal parts. So in most modern practices, which are slim, of potion making, we see mostly just like hair and teeth of animals rather than like the blood of bat, etc., or bat wings and big, nasty, smelly parts that rot really easily. Because I don't have time for that. All right, and of course herbs and other magically charged artifacts. And the most popular form of potion all throughout history is almost definitely the love potion or the philtre. And this is very popular also in Italian magic and witch lore, and the idea that, village witches and malefic witches alike could affect the love lives of the village people is very popular. So there's an Italian love philtre that includes the popular cooking herb basil. As you can imagine, there are some commonalities between potion making and cooking. One of them I can do. One of them you should never try. It's cooking. And so you would soak the basil for about 7 hours in 2 cups of rainwater, and you would filter it through. Then you would turn away from the basil and sing aloud, throwing over 20 cloves and 7 grains of white pepper into the potion. And this would be used to draw a lover. And there were many herbs that were used as aphrodisiacs as well. These verbena, pink parsley, chamomile. Honey has always been used to sweeten the affection of people, both in a romantic and in a less romantic setting. Honey jar spells are quite popular even today. My favorite aphrodisiac herb is probably Damiana, which is used a lot in Mesoamerica, and the constituents of the herb allow the person to sort of relax and sort of ease themselves into sexual acts by making a tea out of the herb, etc. And so when I am making a love potion or a lust tincture or tea for somebody, I almost always use Damiana because of its properties. So, I've mentioned a couple times how potions in the modern world are so less often used by witches, even. At least in America, in my experience with American witches. And, spell work is, fairly common. Bitching about things is probably the most common. But potions, you don't really see much anymore. And so here's a couple modern sources for potions. One of them is one of my absolute favorite modern texts on witchcraft, and you don't pay attention to any of the history written in this book because it was written long enough ago that it's pretty much all inaccurate, but the practical applications of this book and the phrasing and I hate to use the term, but the energy surrounding this book are awesome. And this is the popular Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson. And he has one potion in which one is supposed to steep a little bit of powdered angelica, marjoram, bay, and fennel seed in some hot wine and say a benediction. And I believe this was for protection. Although I forgot to write that down, which is a little silly. I apologize. But get his book and read it and find out for yourselves, because it's a great introductory text for practical applications of magic. Another book that is maybe the more popular book on potion making today is Ars Philtron by Daniel A. Schuelke. I have some problems personally with Schulke's books and all of the massively popular books like this because they are written and produced in such a way that the audience is severely limited based on the language used in the text and the application of the herbs. It's all rather poetic, but to a point where it's exhausting to read. And I mean, there are some practical applications to his writing, and some of it is beautiful. But a lot of it, I think, just kind of distracts and makes the magic inaccessible to people who may not have an education which teaches them the sorts of fancy lingo that he uses. And it's distracting. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Anyway, so I'm going to read you two of his potions just because they give you an idea of modern potion making. So there's the lustration of Mercurius, and these are his words. So, a bath appropriate for invoking the patron of magic and alchemy wisdom. The bath of the wise grants especial gifts prior to labors of the spiritual laboratory. And this would be composed of lavender in 30 grams, essential oil of lavender in 8 drops, essential oil of sandalwood in 8 drops, kosher salt, 60 grams, Epsom salt, 60 grams. Infuse the lavender blossoms in 1.5 liters of boiling water for the space of 30 minutes. Strain and add to a 300-liter bath and stir in, adding salt and oils. For best results, soak at least 40 minutes and dry afterward. So that's one application. Another of his is a stimulating brew called the Warrior's Absolution to lend power during confrontations with enemies, the law, or for use prior to negotiations. And the ingredients for this potion are leaf of rosemary, fresh, 70 grams, cinnamon chips, 30 grams, blossom of chamomile, dried, 30 grams, and flowers of broom, another 30 grams. Add rosemary and cinnamon to a cooking vessel with enough water to cover, bring to a boil, cover and simmer 15 minutes in a separate vessel. Steep the broom and chamomile blossoms in 1 liter of boiling water. Strain both infusion and decoctions in discard herb materials, adding the liquid to the bath water. So you can see that a lot of this application isn't possible for everybody. Not everyone can afford those herbs, which are usually not found growing commonly together. And not everyone can follow his writing, etc. But his potions are nonetheless interesting. And there's also a certain specificity to his recipes, which I think is interesting and not found a lot in folk magic. And there's one more book that I wanted to mention about this, and it's called Witches, Potions, and Spells by Catherine Paulson. And I'm gonna disclaim a little bit because she doesn't at all about the material in this book, and it's the only disclaimer in the book is like this should only be used by real witches. But I mean, of course, everyone when they're like 5 years old picking up a book is going to think they're a real witch. So reading that isn't going to stop them from maybe considering some of these recipes, which include things like cutting the necks of like turtle doves and like, you know, using bat's blood and digging graves, etc. You know, like not, you know, really adequate for children's ears, according to most people's opinions. However, like, she's really done her research, and I totally love the book, and everyone should buy it. Anyway, okay. So these are 2 of her quick little potions. Take earth from the footsteps of him you love, burn and powder it, then burn and powder your own hair, and mix the 2 powders with your own blood. A few drops of this in food or wine will bring true love. And then inversely to the effects of that potion would be to cause a spouse to overlook your infidelities. Take coins that were laid on the eyes of a corpse, wash them in wine, and give it to him to drink, or lay one of them unknown to him among his garments. So these may not be super usable for everybody. However, rather than a spell today, I'm going to provide you guys a recipe from Richard Allen Miller's Ritual and Magical Use of Herbs. And this recipe is for a cordial drink that will act as an aphrodisiac. Okay, so I'll read it slowly, so if any of you guys want to write this down, go ahead. Soak 1 ounce of Damiana, that herb I like so much, in 1 pint of vodka for 5 days. Strain and filter through a coffee filter. Soak the remaining alcohol-drenched leaves in 3/4 pint distilled or spring water for another 5 days. Strain and filter this like you did the other. Then warm the water extracts to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Dissolve this in half a cup of honey. Then you should combine the alcoholic and aqueous or watery extractions, bottle them, and leave them in a cool place to sit and infuse, and age this for about a month. And when you take it out, there may be a little bit of sediment at the bottom. But if you strain this either with the cheesecloth or a strainer, if that'll do the trick, then it'll be gone. But this is really great for rituals, especially one coming up at the beginning of May. So you have almost enough time, not quite enough, but almost enough time to make this before Beltane, or Beltane, as it's also called. All right, so there's that. And finally, I'm going to leave you guys, as always, with your astrology forecast for the week. And this, as always, comes from Cafe Astrology. A first quarter moon occurs on Monday, April 7th, at 4:31 a.m. Monday morning, a first quarter moon occurs. There is a crisis theme surrounding any quarter moon phase, as we feel compelled to take action. Shortly after, we are made aware of how our actions affect those close to us, perhaps through trial and error. Whatever project or initiative we began around the new moon on March 30th is now off the ground, and it may face its first obstacles. So before I go, I just wanted to say another quick thank you to Jeremy Lipson for all of your help texting me over here at the station. And I wanted to let you guys know that these recordings are on YouTube. They're also on the Facebook group for The Witching Hour. And they are also on my blog on Tumblr, which is called Witchcraft Incorporated. So feel free to check it out at each of those locations. And that's about it. Well, have a great night, guys, and thank you for listening to The Witching Hour.